The calendar turns to 2023, and that means we're looking at the NHL trade deadline, joined by scout Jason Bukala to look at what some Canadian teams may be doing ahead of the deadline. And this is Instant Analysis brought to you by Tylenol Rapid Release Gel Caps. Rapid Release for rapid relief. Okay, Jason, let's dive into this thing. Let's start furthest east in Canada with the Montreal Canadiens. They will be sellers ahead of the NHL trade deadline. You put on your scouting cap, something you've worn for quite a long time. If you're looking at the Montreal Canadiens, who do you look at as a potential player that a contending team would like to acquire?
Well, I think the obvious is on the back end with Joel Edmondson, and he's going to be the guy that's going to get targeted the most. 6'5" defenseman, veteran pedigree. Teams even right here in Canada, I think the Edmonton Oilers, that's a potential target for them to upgrade what they have on the back end. So I'm looking at him. The other guy, though, I'm kind of keeping a close eye on is, David Savard's 32 years old. He's got some term left on his deal. It's relatively affordable at 3.5 for the next couple of years, as a cap hit. That might be a player that some teams might sniff around a little bit, even if the Habs were to maybe accommodate with eating a little bit of that salary. So if you get it into that 2.5 range, for an example, that might be something that a team out there might be willing to absorb as a fair type of a price for a player like that as he ages into 33, 34, as you know, it gets harder from there. But something to keep an eye on, Kevin, is the Habs have a ton of draft capital right now for this upcoming draft, and they're only going to add to it. And it's really a big deal because teams are going to be less likely, or they're going to be less willing to want to part with picks in this draft because the 2023 draft is so deep. But the Habs they have 2 firsts, one being the Florida pick that's not even lottery protected. So they could really be going into this draft real heavy in the first round if all the cards fall into place for them.
Yeah, it's what's the saying for Connor Bedard right now? Go to bed for Bedard or something like that.
I'll leave that one with you, but it sounds okay. Sure. All right.
Sure. I'm sure we could come with something better down the line. There's a few teams who would like to fall for Connor Bedard. We'll get a better rhyme at some point. One of those teams, at least it seems like they should be doing it, is the Vancouver Canucks. Now, it hasn't been announced that they're going to tear it down to the studs, but maybe all signs kind of pointing towards a sell-off. There's going to be a lot of pieces on that team should they choose to tear it down to the studs. But let's take a look at one player in particular, someone who intrigues me. It's Andrei Kuzmenko. He comes over. He's had an interesting year this year. What have you made of Andrei Kuzmenko, and what would a contending team be getting in Kuzmenko?
Well, Kuzmenko arrived and he's produced exactly as I thought he would. I mean, he produced at a high level. It took him some time in the KHL to get going, but as he kind of got to that 23, 24 age, he started to really play to an offensive identity. He's done everything the Canucks expected him to do, especially on that deal coming over on the 1 year. He's got 35 points, 17 goals. He's heavy down low, heavy around the crease. He's not a burner in open ice, so he's not a guy that's going to transport the puck a ton. But if he does get the edge, he's got a great release. Team guy, he's a +7 on the Canucks. Like, put that in perspective for a second. He's done everything I think that they could have asked. So that's going to be a very interesting scenario. Dan Milstein represents Kuzmenko. I know that I think almost every team in the league last year had an appetite for the player coming over. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there, because if they can't get him extended, I know all the attention's going to the Bo Horvat UFA scenario, but if they can't get Kuzmenko extended, there's going to be teams that are looking to, or they'll have an appetite to add that type of a player, goal scorer, secondary power play at the very least, maybe first power play unit for a contending team.
So you just mentioned an appetite, and it just got me thinking about the Ottawa Senators. What kind of appetite do the Ottawa Senators have in the second half? Is it that of a contending team? Do they think that they can make a push towards a postseason spot? Is it time to push your chips into the middle a little bit further? Or is this another year where the Ottawa Senators are going to sell off some pieces and maybe just retool? They're not rebuilding, retooling ahead of next season. Let's assume it's the latter, Jason, just for now, just for fun here. If the Ottawa Senators choose to sell off, is there a player that you're targeting, that you're scouting and saying this player would be really good on a contending team?
I went up and down their roster, and I honestly don't see that there's going to be a player or two necessarily on their team that people are going to want to go shopping for. The one that kind of stood out for me a little bit was Austin Watson up front. You know, he's a depth player who can kill penalties, block shots. He doesn't have trade protection. He's on a 1-5 deal. He's expiring. I guess you could go to Travis Hamonic on the back end. I don't know that there's going to be an appetite for that to happen on either side. I have to be honest with you, Kev. Like, I'm leaning 60-40 that the Sens actually aren't sellers. Like, I think that they've tried to sell to their players that they brought in and acquired and have extended, that they want to build something out here. And I think they want to see this through as best as they can. Now, listen, there's a long time between now and March 3rd. And if, you know, you're 8 points out at that point, you got 3 teams in front of you to jump over, I guess things can change. But I think they're going to be really cautious and really patient, because the building's starting to fill up. So there's economics involved. Your youth is starting to get better year in and year out. You got Giroux you brought in, you brought the Brinkat in. The captain definitely wants to win. So there's a lot going on, not to mention the fact that the franchise is for sale. So, I mean, there's a lot going on there. I think you and I should circle back in the coming weeks to see what it looks like, to be honest. I'm not so sure that they're going to be in selling mode.
Jason, I'll circle back with you anytime you like, because you're a brilliant hockey mind and we appreciate this, man. Thanks so much.
All right, Kev. Take care. Thanks for having me.